Choose the sword, and you will join me. Choose the ball, and you join your mother in death. You don't understand my words, but you must choose.
Martin Luther King Jr., Savior or Sellout. By the title, you might be thinking that I'm speaking heresy against the civil rights leaders or the civil rights movement. That's not the case at all. We're going to examine the actions of Martin Luther King Jr. in comparison to the issues relevant to the civil rights movement. We're also going to examine organizations he was affiliated with. I know a handful of Freemasons. One of them is an ex-Mason. One of them confirmed that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. were both Masons. They both were killed because they weren't following the order, just as John F. Kennedy was. But let's not jump too far yet. Let Steve Coakley tell it.
Yes, if you would look to today, where Boule members like Vernon Jordan, who is managing director of Goldman Sachs, he took Bill Clinton to his first Bilderberger meeting in 1971. The black man took the white man from Arkansas to the big international meeting. Vernon Jordan, former head of the Urban League, who groomed Ron Brown, who then went on to become Secretary of Commerce, killed in a plane crash, murdered, because Boule are considered domestic. Martin King was Boule. Look at the relationship between Martin and Kwame over going against the war. You don't hear anybody in the African-centered community primarily against the war. They're basically accepting it or looking for what they try to get when whites are passing out things like, a grant here, this or that. They don't appear to be focused on that money that's being wasted, those billions of dollars.
You saying the Afro-centered community
Africans
support the war?
They are not, no, I'm just saying, they are not pushing against the war.
Yeah.
Same way Martin King,
I understand what you're saying.
when April 4th of
You're
67,
right. You're right.
1 year before he was killed to the day, when he came out of Riverside Church with Kwame in a shirt and tie in the front row, waiting to hear, because he called and said, you got to hear this. He comes out against the war. Boule men are told to be domestic, not international. Mickey Leland was Sigma Pi Phi. He tried to stop a starvation going on in Ethiopia, Somalia. His plane crashes into the mountain. Congressman from Texas, he dies. Ron Brown, Martin King, no question. Martin King became international, and that became his biggest sin. He was financed by some of the greatest foundations America ever had to offer. But if they get beyond the defined limit, then there's trouble.
We should understand that the so-called white people hated the so-called black people, to say the least, or as I like to call them, the melanists. Since this was the case, why do you think Martin Luther King Jr. was such a fervent activist for integration? Is it because he thought we should all just get along? Or is it because he felt a need to be validated by our oppressors? Or maybe it's because the masters pulling the strings told Martin, the puppet, to do this. And why was he such a strong activist for turning the other cheek? Was it to keep our people docile and at bay? Was that the purpose? If all the melanist people in this country came together on one front, ready to fight, that would have been a messy scene. So what did the puppet masters do? They told one of the most influential characters at that time to preach. If a man stabs you in the face with a knife, give him a loaded gun and let him blow your head smooth off. That's what that doctrine was doing. It was making people go from having a knife in their face to having a bullet in their head. They were giving up their power by being docile. Brother Malcolm wasn't having that. Why was he such a big activist for equal rights? To those that hated us, why not fight for the rights for us to have our own laws, our own cities, our own police, and our own schools? Why the need to be validated by a system that has never respected us? To work for them in the corporate world, there are rules against wearing braids and afros on some cases. You have to wear their clothes, speak like them, wear your hair like them. You have to depend on them for jobs, period. there are a few so-called black-owned businesses. He fought for integration of schools. But how progressive was that fight, really? Since we're integrated, we're forced to learn their science, i.e., we share common ancestors with apes, and all life spawned from rocks that were rained on for some odd billion years, that turned into primordial soup some odd billion years ago. And Columbus discovered America, although Christopher Columbus never even touched down on America. And how could he have discovered it when the Gadites, which are the Native Americans, already occupied the land? Was his fight for integration? Was his fight for us to be integrated in their schools, get their degrees, then get out just to use those degrees as credentials to get their jobs? That's all a degree boils down to, credentials. It says which one of their schools you graduated from, then get out just to use those degrees as credentials to get their jobs. It wasn't that Mr. King was a great speaker or a radical revolutionary that made him so great. It was because he was publicized. Many men could have been Martin Luther King. Many men were Martin Luther King. But many men did not have his connections. He was also famous because he was martyred for the cause. He was killed to put the nail in the coffin of the civil rights movement. He was told to fight for integration rather than liberation. I'm not trying to take away from what he did, but there was a better cause to fight for. Martin Luther King wasn't a great man. He was just a man that was greatly publicized, a Mason that made our people docile. I'm not trying to be a heretic, just provoke thought. Shalom.
Incoherent species intel.
What you talking about?
It's words you need to know.